like to say something about the Q&A session. I've heard it said about history programs that question and answers go on too long. And I'd like to point out, first of all, it's valuable information for historical record. We take these programs for that, so I'm not inclined to stop the question and answer at any point. And anyone who wants to leave at any time is perfectly free to. You don't have to now or during the question and answers.
Peter.
Those who do not learn from history are compelled to repeat it. And I'd like to suggest that even though many of the good ideas in STAR have been published and published well, that there are also important aspects of it that don't really transmit their value to subsequent generations except in the form of code. So I'd like to ask the following two questions. Number one, can anyone make a substantial case why Xerox should not put the entire source code of STAR into the public domain? And number two, were Xerox to do such a thing, would it be possible to find it?
We should repeat the question. Peter's question is there any substantial argument as to why the STAR source code ought not now to be put in the public domain? And secondly, if there were an agreement that that were an acceptable thing to do, could anyone lay hands on the original STAR source code or a facsimile thereof in order to do that? I can't possibly answer either of those questions except to say I cannot myself automatically see a reason why it couldn't be as some other classical source code is in the public domain, but that would be an issue for Xerox to sort out. The other question, though, about the availability of it, who knows? I imagine it must be around.
Well, in fact, up until 2-3 months ago, Xerox was still supporting the products. There had been a new virtual machine implementation built that ran on top of Windows. It runs very fast, actually. They tell me that they have gigabytes of stuff, but they're not quite sure what versions and stuff because it's just a small crew that was finishing the maintenance. They stopped supporting it just recently. I suggest you talk to someone at Xerox. Mark Weiser is nearby.
Thank you. You said there was the virtual.
There is a virtual machine implementation. It is a Xerox product that was sold until about 2 months ago. It runs on PCs, Windows.
We have a question way over here.
Is the STAR program the year 2000 compliant?
Is it year 2000 compliant? They have no way.
Oh, there's a wonderful answer to this, actually. Although it's not year 2000 compliant, it does have some fairly nice features about dealing with dates and other things like that. When is it? It hasn't blown up yet, though. Is it year 2000 when it hits the wall, or is there something earlier?
I think the timestamp actually blows up around 2020 or something like that.
Yeah. I think that there is a problem with the configuration software, which if Alan can rewrite it, it doesn't let you configure a new STAR. I tried entering 00 and it said no way. But that's just, that's your code? Okay.
Yeah.
But that was, but that's just the code to set the time on the machine. It had a few idiosyncrasies where it really couldn't keep time forever. We tried.
So it is year 2000 compliant. It's not year 2020 compliant.
Ron Crane.
A side note, the XNS time protocol is the 32-bit number, which is the number of seconds since January 1, 1901. And that 32-bit counter rolls over around 2020.
Yes.
I have a question regarding chip reach. Who's the person who designed it? Xerox is still using it. It's a wonderful program that IC designers will love to have it on the pen. Do you know anything about it? What was the name of the program? Chip reach.
Chiplets? Well, a little programming
We use it in El Segundo for IC design.
We're the wrong guy
I
to
see.
ask that question.
Oh,
Sorry. Yeah. We just use SIL, and you weren't allowed to design ICs. Yeah, wait a minute. Oh, Charles, yeah.
I'm Charles Ernie. One of the things I thought would be useful for Dave to comment on is the design methodology that we use, and the fact that we designed this based on abstract notions of what the functionality were rather than the specifics of the interface. So maybe you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. On the first day, good second.
why don't you repeat the question?
That Charles asked about some comments about the work that was done on the design methodology. Dave Smith referred earlier to the fact that it was done in a principled way. In fact, I commissioned you might say, a task force, which Charles Irby chaired, as it were, to develop a methodology first. So before we did the design, we decided on a methodology for user interface design so that we'd be able properly to manage both the process and the abstractions that we were going to be working on. And then as the user interface design was done, in stages and to attack different tasks, there was a very sort of consistent approach. The information display was designed independently from the function invocation, for example, which turned out to matter a great deal. And both of those were designed independently from the user's conceptual model. And this was the first time that anything like this had been done, either the development of a methodology per se, or then a principled user interface design. That's one of the reasons why STAR, from a usability point of view, is such a great improvement over most of its successors, is because we actually did it by designing it using a set of principles rather than just sort of randomly copying what someone else had done or kind of debugging it into existence. So that turned out to be very important. Charles himself and Dave Smith, Eric Harslam, and Ralph Kimball, along with Linda Bergstenson, and a number of people from Park who were still in Park proper, but were happily helped us by joining our task force. And I include Larry Tesler, Charles Simony, at least Bill Verplank, a number of other people as well. So it was a big and very focused effort. Some people thought, gee, it's a long period of time just to decide what you're going to decide or to design how you're going to do the design. But I feel that it really served the process and the subsequent industry very well. Yes?
It seems pretty clear that one of the major shortcomings of STAR was the thing that you cited about the turnkey closed model, as opposed to somehow seeing in the crystal ball that the independent software market was going to come into existence. There was some speculation at Park at the time that such a software market would come into existence, but of course it was all just speculation. I'd be curious about what you think and what Dave Smith thinks also about whether that was something that at the time was just impossible to have foreseen in the STAR program and would have just been overreaching itself, or whether looking back on it you feel like, gee, I wish we'd gone the other way and tried to make it a platform.
Well, I'll say what I thought, and I think other folks did too. The question was, in retrospect, doesn't it seem as if you could have thought that you should provide more of a programmable open system, even though there wasn't an independent software industry at the time? And we actually did make the XDE, the Xerox Development Environment, in such a way that it could be packaged up and shipped. And we did begin shipping it to customers about, if I remember, about 18 months after we launched the product. It was, however, designed for fairly serious hardcore programming use, and we did not understand a lot about what it meant to export and support that kind of an environment. But it actually always was a part of the plan to do that. We just did not put it in front of the other objectives. Later on, of course, some of the objectives for the program changed, but I generally feel that if it had happened earlier, we might have been more a part of jump-starting a better, earlier independent software industry. The first few years of the PC software industry were pretty rocky, and largely because of the tools and so on that were available. So I see it as an opportunity partially missed.
Actually, there was a graduate stuff here in '83. There was a project called Phoenix, which was taking essentially the Tahoe toolkit. Dave mentioned that. I think he mentioned today. Maybe he mentioned last time. And one of the problems was we didn't have a toolkit installed that drawing on the screen required everybody to draw on the screen. Well, in Tahoe, there was a toolkit for doing that. And in the Phoenix project, a toolkit was built. And originally, and it became Viewpoint. Viewpoint was an open toolkit-based architecture that intended for third parties to develop software for. You had to develop in Mesa and required a little more learning than what most people had. But about 84, 85, we started shipping Viewpoint to allow people to do just what you suggested.
Can you turn up the volume? Someone requested.
Oh, can we have the volume up a little higher?
I would like to make one more comment about the previous question, Charles Irby's question about the design methodology. Dave Liddell is correct that before we did the design for the design. And it's interesting that the principles that we came up with are no big surprises to people today. Anyone in the human factors business, anyone who goes to a SIGCHI conference or reads the journals, it's all pretty standard stuff. It was doing user testing. It's analyzing the tasks that users are doing in their context, trying to figure out what objects they're using and what actions they're performing on the objects. And in fact, we went out many times in the early days to various sites and decomposed in excruciating detail the tasks that people were performing, went back and did a design that would enable you to accomplish those very same functions, but hopefully in a much simpler and more improved way. I think it's very revealing from an historical standpoint that the SIGCHI organization formed after STAR came out. The first SIGCHI conference was in 1982.
Yes.
I have some information that might be interesting to the speakers. I work at BARC, and just last week I had a visit from a colleague at Fuji Xerox, the Japan branch of Xerox. He told me that I don't know if the global view of JSTAR, that product in Japan is still active, and had been, and that Sony Corporation this year had selected it for a system D that they had. And then, for good measure, we opened up global view system here and the network icons. And I dropped a document on this guy's printer at Fuji Xerox in Japan, and it worked. So,
Speaking of JSTAR and Fuji Xerox and so on, I very well remember when Bill English and I and Joe Becker and others were there for the launch of the Fuji Xerox JSTAR. Bill and Joe, of course, had been there in Japan several years getting that program working. And I was not very used to the way that literal translations from Japanese turn into English phraseology. And so after the launch, that is on the day of the launch, the booth was absolutely packed with people of all kinds, particularly competitors, people from other companies and so on, looking at the product. And I remember one of the Fuji Xerox marketing folks translating for me the review that was written the next day in the paper. And he said, it was clear in real time, he was thinking how to phrase this back to me, and he said, the Fuji Xerox Star is as different from conventional computer interaction as clouds from mud. And I thought, boy, you can't do any better than that, you know.
Wait, hold on just a second. I think that Mark was talking about the international features of STAR and how they were a big element in the sales that we did have. We should recognize the years of hard and very creative and dedicated work of the man who was largely responsible for the internationalization of STAR, and that is Joe Becker. Without whom a lot of these tough issues, especially like making a selection in Arabic, which starts like this, and then if there's an English word, it'll go the other way, and then when you go back to Arabic, the selection will go the other, and he made it all work.
That. Oh, and then he said, and what if the writer is writing in Arabic and they're quoting something in Hebrew?
He figured it out.
Right. Yes?
I've been very curious about what kind of tools are used to create these programs with, other than the what we call traditional teletype tools. The old, word processing, assembly, and compilers, and whatever. Is there any new environments that are coming up with more real-time interactive for low-level machine language, native machine language code? The only things I've seen require you to stop the programs before you make changes. I wonder if there are any where I could get any information about full bandwidth, object level programming environment and debugging environments, which I'm not able to find. It's usually hardware based in circuit emulator. I wonder how you actually work with this new program, how anybody works programs today, the world is still not in their skills and their tools that they're using. So I look at SD98, Red Systems Conference, all kinds of news groups and pinpoint things.
Hopper was extremely fast at the time. We had things such as, I remember the debugger, you could, at some point, if you realize you'd screwed up, you could back up and say, no, do it like this. Back up down the call stack, force a call differently, passing different variables, and go in and say, no, skip over this and do that. And this was in 87, something like that. It was just amazing tools available that, according to my friends who are still writing code, tell me they're just now starting to see this stuff in some of the new Microsoft products. I'm probably the most nerdy person in this group, and I can't answer the questions anymore since I've done human interface. But if you find this man right here, Charles Haynes, who was the debugger person who put in, and other things. Talk to him afterwards, okay?
Significant. And did the machine actually end up on the desks of high-level Fortune 500 executives?
The question is, for how long were sales significant, and did the machines wind up on the desks of Fortune 500 professionals? I can answer the second part. I was only here through most of 1982, and then went off and tried to put similar but different machines on the desks of Fortune 500 professionals, not to print documents, but do other funny data-like things. It is certainly the case that the primary customers were the biggest customers you can imagine. That is, it did indeed go virtually always to professionals. As a matter of fact, it was hard to get the sales force to quit trying to sell it to word processing people. Word processing people were proud of their ability to withstand pain, and to know all these complicated commands, and they were not the target. And it definitely went, in modest numbers, I admit, to that very target audience. Who can say what was the period over which STAR was sold on the various different platforms, including the Sun? I don't know if any of us have the right answer for that. Yes, way at the back.
I fell in love with your design and I wanted to say thank you. But I also wondered, who invented the undo command?
The question is the question following a complimentary statement about our design. Who invented the undo command? Now, as far as I know, Warren Titleman invented the undo command in InterLisp, or its BBN Lisp, its prior name. I believe that's true, and it was culturally very strong here in Park, and so was not optional not to have it in the system. I think it's fair to say that the ability to make text editing documents undoable flows from J. Strother Moore's piece table invention, which was the thing that made it possible to have a text document in which you could still undo it by not irrevocably committing the data structure. That at least would be my assessment. What else? Yeah.
As far as undo goes, we might as well come clean here. Dave's trying to get a picture of the keyboard. If we could switch to the camera for a second.
All right.
There is a key labeled on the keyboard, undo.
Oh, he's got it now, Dave.
Oh, he's not.
He's got the camera now.
No.
At any rate, it's one of the function keys on there. And we thought that as designers, that was enough to ensure that it would actually be implemented. Unfortunately, in our naivety, we were wrong, and it was never implemented, and STAR did not actually have undo. However, we did have one thing that we did win when it comes to undo. We used to have a contest. Can you find the sentence in the STAR functional spec that causes the most implementation work? That was the sentence. Every command can be undone by pushing the undo key.
Yeah.
When you talked about names for the product, that one of the original ones was to be Debris for the STAR. How did the term STAR, how did the name STAR?
No, the name STAR was made up by Bob Spinrad, who was at that time vice president of system development. He was the head of SDD at that time, and he and I were once again trying to sell it to yet another skeptical senior executive, and we had just been put into the clutches of Dave Culbertson, who happened to be a sailing enthusiast. And so Spinrad said, let's name it after a sailboat class, okay, a one design sailing class. Maybe that will cause him to be interested in it. And STAR, well, you know, it wasn't very easy to get Dave interested in things. You know? And the STAR was both a decent, interesting one design sailboat and also a tolerable name for an office appliance. I mean, we looked at a number of other ones, but, you know, somehow Lightning didn't quite do it, and, you know, Sunfish and everything else, but STAR seemed okay. That's where it came from, yeah.
Yeah, Daybreak was the name of the 6085 launch. Yeah.
I'm sorry, is there any idea how many were actually ever produced?
Something like 30,000. Yes.
Object-oriented GUI, which I'm a strong supporter of, but recently you may have noticed there's something of a backlash against object-oriented GUIs, or maybe it's more of a muddling would be a better word for it. With the longest perspective, perhaps, of most folks on object-oriented GUIs, has your faith in object-oriented GUIs been shaken at all?
Not badly enough to call them GUIs, but we know it.
Out of curiosity, if you were to look at the descent lines from the start, there's a lot of, what would be the first and maybe some of the second layer ones that you would consider to be obviously descended from the star, at least in idea, mimetic concepts, if you will? I'm thinking particularly that the Lisa might have been the closest.
Well, there are a few that were licensees, okay? That is, there was a product done at Sun called, I forget, but it was
the port to the Sun. The port to the Sun.
There was a toolkit done at Sun under license from Xerox. OpenLook, thank you, right, which was a direct descendant. Similarly, the product that we did at Metaphor, we actually had a license for as well, and it was a clear direct descendant. Lisa had some similarities and some differences. It was more similar than the Macintosh was. Obviously, there was, you should pardon the expression, next step, and motif. What was it? Yeah, the perk had some similarities and some differences as well. What else? Other guys can think about it.
Well, actually, this article by Jeff Johnson that Dave referred to, which are up here, has a very nice chart in it that has quite a dependency graph of star and everything. So you're invited to come up here and take a look at that.
A lot of hay has been made over a certain visit by Steve Jobs. When he showed up here and looked at everything, whether that exists or not. Maybe there's a story there, or maybe not. But I'm more curious. You would read a lot, especially maybe in the last 10 years, about how Xerox invented it and everybody else got rich off of it. And I'm just curious, from what was the, what can you say about the attitudes or the feelings inside Xerox, inside PARC, watching these other machines, garbage, not so much garbage, whatever, making a lot of money. Was it the proud child of our ideas? Was it the goddamn thief of our ideas?
We just thought it was great. Okay? We just simply wanted our ideas to go out there in the world, and we weren't at all concerned with commercial success. Ken.
My name's Ken Peer. I started off before the Star in that division. Dave hired me in. I've been at PARC for about 20 years. I just want to say this in public. 2 of the inventions at PARC, okay, make Xerox over $2 billion a year in gross revenues. Just 2 of them, all right? So we're very proud of the money that we have made for this corporation. And they are the DocuTech and the DocuPrint printers. The other thing, Dave, I thought you were going to tell one of my favorite stories, and I just have to substitute a couple of words. Remind me, the Star, I think, was unveiled at the 1981 NCC for the rest of the world, and the booth was packed, and the Japanese press was there, and they went back and wrote all about it. And when it was translated to me in just the same way, the translator looked at it and said, "This says that the Xerox Star disemboweled the competition."
Yeah, I decided to leave that part out, but that's true.
Research.
Bob.
Yeah, Dave, I heard a rumor a long time ago that when the Department of Defense was designing Ada, they came to Xerox and asked if they could use Mesa instead, and we said no. Is that true?
Bob's question was that he had heard that long ago, when the DoD had that high-order language thing on the street, what eventually became Ada, and that they came to Xerox and asked if they could, quote, have Mesa, and that Xerox said no. I don't think that's quite correct. I do remember someone asking permission for us to give a briefing to the Ada committee about a number of the features that were in Mesa, because we hadn't at that time yet really written widely about at least some of the features that were in Mesa. And we did sign off on that briefing happening. I think what you may have heard is that we were asked if we would like to take essentially an ARPA contract to, as it were, harden Mesa to be that Ada, and we said no, because we didn't want to do contracting. We were actually trying to construct these commercial products. But that's my recollection about it. Peter, do you remember anything about that?
Just said, does ring a faint bell that there was interest in Mesa as part of the Ada effort. I don't remember whether, and I'm pretty sure that there was some Xerox political reason why Mesa was not submitted as one of the candidates in the Ada competition. The person who probably would know the most about that is Butler Lamson.
Yeah, maybe Satterthwaite. I remember coming to me and asking how much can we
Sweet, do you know anything about that? No more than what you said.
Okay.
What about,
Go ahead, Jan.
what about Niklaus Stewart, when he was at Park, he patterned a lot of Module 2 after his,
The question is, did Niklaus Wirth's visit to Park and his exposure to Mesa have impact to how he designed Modula 2? I think he certainly has said that. I think he's quoted that as one of the sources of his ideas. Yeah.
The Xerox cards in the interface in Star clearly made text-based interfaces obsolete, command lines obsolete, and it hasn't really been better in 17 years. Because someday it's obviously going to be obsolete too. And I was wondering if you had any ideas or thoughts or any research that been done in Xerox about stuff that's way beyond that type of interface, as far as the user interaction.
The question was that given that the Xerox Star and the interface approach that it sort of exemplifies or embodies still seems to be a leading form and the strong successor to the old text-based interfaces. He was really asking about opinions about things which will compare to the Xerox Star as clouds to mud. That is, what is it that will obsolete the graphic user interface?
I think the answer is pretty clear. It's Windows 98.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Well, except of course,
Even today, Xerox Park is really working with Xerox. As did Apple Lab.
I will say one thing in seriousness, though.
As I was one of the designers of the Star interface, I am a little disappointed that in the last decade we haven't really pushed much beyond this desktop metaphor with its documents and folders. I mean, even at Apple, I was unable to get them to willingly go beyond this metaphor. They were just too successful for too long and developed too much inertia. I would like to see it pushed in directions of information retrieval. One of the neatest things about the internet are all the search engines that are out there. Those are just great. And there's no reason you can't do that on your local machine as well. And there's a lot of areas that we could make progress in, and there hasn't been sufficient, anyway, innovation in the last decade. I'd say that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I'll second this as a hardware designer. Having our MIP rate go from half to 500 and seeing the user interface barely change has been an incredible disappointment. I remember on the Star software, if you wanted to run the spelling checker, that was a big deal. You waited a while. In fact, we had spelling checker servers. Now so this is the biggest change that's happened in 10 years is now PowerPoint does spelling checking while you're, entering the characters. And I predicted that would happen someday, I remember. So that's the only change I've seen now in 17 years is spelling correction is as you type.
Also,
Don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah, okay.
Actually, Word still has pagination. It's called fast save.
I spent some time at STI. I spent some time at Silicon Graphics working with the Nintendo game machine and technology and so forth. And even though I'm not a video game person, if you look at the number of children that are growing up with amazing skill at playing these very, very fast video games, and you think about some of the navigational technology there and some of the methodology for moving around in the space and doing things in that space, especially if it's interacting with you in kind of an entertaining way, it seems to me that there's a germ of a new UI paradigm in there somewhere. I don't know quite what it is yet. And it's certainly not a video game per se, but I think it can build on some of the same technologies.
Well, certainly today we can build our microprocessors with things like the 3D acceleration for free, essentially. So if I know that there was the Insight group here, which I visited a little while ago. I would really like to see, something to utilize the transistors better on the chip for the user interface. And if it's 3D, we can do it for free, essentially. So we're at that point on technology that that's possible.
I think Charles actually identified, if anybody's interested in pursuing it, I'm not in that business myself, but a direction to go in trying to push the interface forward, look at games. Look at video games.
So I want to see a prototype because we're doing silicon that we need. I'm just shocked there's no university research or no research at all in this area, and I really would like to see a prototype. And I'll give you the hardware if you give me the software prototype. So
Well, what about all of the VR stuff that's going on?
it's a good start.
So go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the invention of the Mesa programming language and why you decided to choose Mesa as the language for Pilot and Copilot and Star?
Sure. The question is, how was Mesa invented and why did we decide to use it? The other language alternatives that we had at that time fell into two classes. They were either very superior for quickly building prototypes or even building large elaborate systems, but had the well-known performance difficulties that you would expect with these two very powerful systems we had here, namely Interlisp and Smalltalk. Okay, it was not practical, obviously, to do an implementation in those, although Smith stubbornly continued to prototype in them for as long as he possibly could. The other set of alternatives that was available at that time weren't sufficiently type safe or didn't have the right set of abstractions and so on for building industrial strength software of which you hope to sell hundreds of thousands of copies. So and that was primarily BCPL. C even didn't exist at that time, that splendid language embodying the grade given to its designer. It wasn't even here in that moment, so it was BCPL or other very weakly protected machine-oriented languages. So Mesa was actually quite a nice design. It had a few excesses in it that took us a little while to get out, but it gave us tremendous reliability in constructing this elaborate piece of software. And by God, you made a change to things and it started running again the way it was supposed to, and so on. So this was a curious window in the history of programming languages, and the idea of building a big software system that was nevertheless going to be replicated and sold very cheaply, so you couldn't ship a systems engineer with every copy, was really quite new. And that was the reason for the Mesa choice. Peter.
I'd like to just add a little footnote to that. There was a working group at PARC that met a number of times. It was a very high-powered group looking at the requirements for a programming language for the work to be done at PARC itself. And while that group was not directly coupled to the evolution of Mesa and Mesa's follows on, in fact, Mesa had already been developed to a fair point by that time. There were ideas coming directly from PARC as to what a modern system programming language needed. That I think influenced Mesa, the choice of Mesa, very heavily. For example, the fact that Mesa has a very rich type system and is generally very type safe. This was not a popular point of view for hardcore system programming in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. And I think that it's fair to say that the Mesa artifact, the ideas in it, originated pretty much at PARC. That's right. And that it was the apt tool to hand when Star was being programmed.
Yes, over here.
I want to respond to the thing that Charles mentioned about 3D interfaces being a direction to explore. It's amusing to me that the rage in video games right now are 3D multiplayer network games. I recall many years ago Maze War being a very early 3D
True. In fact, the best thing about Maze War, the thing that I appreciated about Maze War, was that otherwise I never would have gotten people to be willing to test all that complicated internetworking code. And no, I'm perfectly serious. It was a wretched testing problem, but people playing Maze War absolutely tortured every line of that code, and I was tremendously grateful for that idea. Dick.
In response to the question about why Mesa,
Dave Kerber was kind enough to take a paper that I had written back in '85 and scanned in with Acrobat Capture and put on his website, which doesn't really go all the way back in history to the stuff Peter was talking about, but it has a bibliography that does, and it's a fairly clear description of Tahoe, the state of Tahoe circa 1985. So I don't know if we can make the URL for that available, but
We'll publish that.
I can give another URL.
Go ahead.
If you just go, well, I will have to put it on tonight, but if you go to you go to www.sweetshop.com, spelled SWEETSHOPPE. That happens to be my a website that my wife gave me when she changed her domain name. I'll put a copy of the paper there.
Cute.
Not a question, just park trivia. I believe it is true that the Maze War, all the programmers were playing it all the time, and of course we were all hackers and we were hacking the sources, and as a result of that, the authors got upset with everyone making cheats, and therefore they stored the sources in encrypted form on the source tree. And I believe out of all the software innovation that was happening at the park, the Maze War sources were the only software stored in encrypted form.
The Starship with any hidden Easter eggs that you know of?
The question is, did Star ship with any hidden Easter eggs that I know of? Let me assure you, not any that I knew of. But I wouldn't bet that there weren't. What else? Okay, thank you very much.